Yeah, thank you, Congressman. We appreciate your insight into this vital issue. And isn't it wonderful? Here we have two great leaders from our Congress, one Republican, one Democrat, all for the state of Israel. We're so fortunate. Thank you. I'd like now to call on Dennis Koehnen, Florida Executive Committee member and past regional chair of the Anti-Defamation League, who will introduce our distinguished panel for this next part of today's summit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. How are you doing? Nice to see you. Well, good morning. My name is Dennis Koehnen, and I'm a National Commissioner and a Florida Executive Committee member and former ADL, Florida Regional Chair. Before I introduce our next esteemed speaker, I'd like to take a moment or two to share some thoughts with you. All of us have gathered here today to show our solidarity with the State of Israel, with the people of Israel, and the nation of Israel. We have gathered here to learn about the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, and to show that the voice of American Jews is strongest when united, that unity is indispensable for Israel. While there is legitimate criticism of Israel and her policies, as we are learning here today, there is a concerted effort to single out Israel above all other countries. When the Jewish state is vilified above all others, when hatred, loathing, and lies persist in the voice of critics, that is no longer simply criticism of Israel. Anti-Semitism, hatred, and bigotry are the unfortunate reasons why the Anti-Defamation League was brought into being. They are the reasons why the organization has been active and vocal since 1913. And they are the reasons why the ADL stands firmly here today to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. We urge you to speak out, be active, be educated, get the facts to the media, and spread the truth. And now it is my honor to introduce Mr. William Daroff. He is the Vice President for Public Policy and Director of the Washington Office of the Jewish Federations of North America. He is a leading advocate for the American Jewish community in the nation's capital. As the Chief Lobbyist and Principal Spokesperson on Public Policy and International Affairs for the 157 Jewish federations and 400 independent communities represented by JFNA, Bill Daroff ensures that our voice is a prominent force on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch. Mr. Daroff guides the Jewish community's advocacy efforts on key domestic policy issues and advises policymakers and elected officials on Jewish communal concerns, principally those related to the U.S.-Israel relationship, the Middle East conflict, vulnerable Jewish communities across the world, and the fight to combat states that promote terror. He currently serves on the Iran Working Group of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. He also is helping to coordinate the Federation's community-based response to the assault on Israel's legitimacy through the new Israel Action Network. President George W. Bush appointed Daroff to serve on the honorary delegation to accompany him to Jerusalem for the celebration of the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel. And in 2008, he was named by the Forward as being among the 50 most influential Jews in America. Mr. Daroff received his bachelor's degree in political science and history, a master's degree in political science, and a Juris Doctorate from Case Western Reserve University. He's married to Heidi Kreiser Daroff, and they have 2 children. Join me in welcoming Mr. Daroff.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you for all the work that you do and all the work of the Anti-Defamation League. I'd like to thank, as the previous speakers have done, all of you for showing up here today, really with your feet and your action to show your solidarity with the State of Israel in this terrible assault on Israel's legitimacy. I'd also like to thank the Miami Federation and their excellent leadership for bringing us all together. We have an amazing panel here that, unlike me, needs no introduction. So I will be very brief. We'll be hearing from these three remarkable speakers, and I'll introduce them very briefly. Alan Dershowitz is the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Case for Israel. And whether it's Jimmy Carter or Norman Finkelstein or Walden Mersheimer, Professor Dershowitz ensures that the pro-Israel voice is heard loud and clear. To Alan's left is Natan Sharansky. Natan is a human rights activist who served as a symbol of the movement to free Soviet Jewry under communist rule. From 1996 to 2005, he served as minister as well as deputy prime minister in successive Israeli governments. He is today the chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel. And to my right is the Honorable Professor Erwin Cutler. Erwin is law professor emeritus, constitutional and comparative law scholar, international human rights lawyer, counsel to prisoners of conscience. He has been a member of the Canadian Parliament since 1999 and former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. He has variously been described in these roles and responsibilities as being at the forefront of the struggle for justice, peace, and human rights. He is also a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism and in combating the assault on Israel's legitimacy. So I'm tempted to start with a joke about two former ministers and a Harvard law professor, but I couldn't think of a punchline that would be acceptable in current company. You can think about that. What we're going to do is hear from these three exceptional leaders to talk about combating the assault on Israel's legitimacy, and then I'll try to engage them in some conversation. I don't think it's going to be difficult to have them engage in conversation. We want to talk about the underpinnings of the delegitimization campaign, how it's played out in governmental and international arenas. When is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? When is there legitimate criticism of Israel? When is it illegitimate? How our community needs to be concerned about this, and then also what we as individual Jews, as individual friends of Israel, can do to move this forward. So with that, Alan.
Thank you so much. This is the first time I've been able to say the following. Thank you, neighbors, and thank you for welcoming me to my new partial home in Miami. So I look forward to seeing you on many, many occasions, walking down Lincoln Road and walking on the beach and being at events like this. It's such a pleasure for me to be among my heroes, and there are no greater heroes for me in my life than Natan Sharansky and Erwin Cutler, and they are the Lamed Vavniks of the Jewish community in this generation. So let me start with the positive. No country in the history of the world has ever had more legitimacy in its birth than the State of Israel. Think about it. Israel was established by law, by legal documents, by the Balfour Declaration, by congressional actions, by the French Parliament, the British Parliament, the United States Congress. It was established in legitimacy by the Peel Commission, by the United Nations in 1948, by Resolution 242 of the United Nations. It has always engaged only in self-defense. Compare that to other countries of the world, including our beloved the United States. We were born in the blood of revolution. So many other countries were born through just overt colonialism. Australia, New Zealand, colonialists came with the flag of Britain, got rid of all the local population and now live in peace and legitimacy without anybody raising questions about their legitimacy or their right to exist. Israel, more than any country in the world today, more than any country, operates under the rule of law. Let me give you an example. When the United States is involved in battles, and we are, to defend our own people in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Pakistan, and efforts are made to try to challenge those in the courts of the United States, the administration, every administration, Republican and Democrat, fights to keep those issues away from the courts. And the courts agree and accept none of those issues. The Israeli court accepts every case brought to it by Palestinians, by Israeli dissidents. In the middle of wars, in the middle of battles, they issue injunctions telling the IDF, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. What other country indicts its own and convicts its own former presidents, former prime ministers? How many of Israel's leaders have been subject to the judicial process? Compare that to any other country in the world. Israel is the most vibrant democracy. It has the freest press, the most vocal Knesset, the most vocal dissidents in the world. How can anybody challenge the legitimacy of the state of Israel? And yet it is constantly challenged. And let me list to you the way in which it's challenged. It's not only direct challenges, but every time one talks about the one-state solution, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, that is a direct challenge to Israel's legitimacy, because the one-state solution, as conceived of by Israel's enemies, is one Palestinian state. One state ruled by Hamas, ruled by Hezbollah, or even ruled by the Palestinian Authority. But the one-state solution is a direct challenge to Israel's legitimacy. Anytime the word apartheid is used, whether by Jimmy Carter or by Bishop Tutu, it is a direct challenge to Israel's legitimacy. Why? The world was committed to dismantling the apartheid regime. There's only one response to apartheid: ending the legitimacy of the government. So the word apartheid is a synonym for Israel's illegitimacy. When boycotts are made, and boycotts, by the way, don't apply only to Ariel. When Bishop Tutu wants a boycott, he wants a cultural boycott of Tel Aviv. He demanded that the Cape Town Opera Company not play Porgy and Bess, written by a Jew who supported Israel, who was a Zionist, not to be allowed to play not on the West Bank, but in Tel Aviv itself. Bishop Tutu is instrumental in efforts to try to delegitimate the Jewish state. Whenever Israel is singled out, when the world forgets about what's going on, occupation by China of Tibet, what's going on in Chechnya, what went on in so many other parts of the world, in Africa and the Sudan, and singles out only Israel for condemnation, as one of our speakers previously mentioned, all the resolutions against Israel. That's delegitimation by another form. Recently, there's a campaign that started in Australian universities and came to Princeton University this week, headed by Professor Singer, who I didn't even know was Jewish. You know, there are so many of these professors who were never Jewish until it comes to saying, as a Jew, I oppose the law of return. That's what Professor Singer and some Princeton and Australian professors have done. They reveal their Jewishness for the first time in order to use it as a legitimation for the delegitimation of Israel. Opposition to the law of return is delegitimation of Israel as the national home of the Jewish people.